Okay, there it is. Well, thank you all for joining. Welcome to our probably annual webinar on UPS and backup power. And if you are anywhere within the area, this is probably feeling pretty appropriate today, considering we are experiencing storms and potential power outages. I know we're slated for, in Louisville, we're slated for some serious storms this afternoon. Dustin's got to finish up this webinar and go pick up his kids because they're now scheduled for an early release. So definitely a salient topic for today. But weather isn't the only thing that threatens your IT equipment. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that can affect the power that you're supplying to your critical systems. So without further ado, I want to introduce Dustin and allow him to share with you the critical information you need. But thanks again for joining. My name is Leah. If you have any questions in the chat, I'll probably answer them, and I will poke Dustin to answer those for you while he presents. But other than that, take it away, Dustin. Thanks everyone for coming.
All right, sounds good. So a little bit about me. My name is Dustin Lampkin. I've been at Mirzon for almost 4 years now. I've been in IT for over 20 years. It's been a while, and I've always done that from Southern Indiana. Born and raised here, but I crossed that river into Louisville for most of my career. Since COVID, most things are remote now, so I do that and do a decent amount of travel. I have way more hobbies than I have time. I've got hobbies out the wazoo. I do a lot of Legos. There's remote controlled stuff from cars to planes to 3D printing and laser cutting, all kinds of good stuff. So I get way too into things. So some of the things we're going to be talking about today is the critical piece of technology for ensuring uninterrupted power in a world now where everything has to be online all the time. So this is more than just an inconvenience as it used to be. It's a significant risk to businesses, from financial losses to client optics. Repercussions are terrible. Nobody wants to go to a website and it be down for whatever reason, have systems offline where they can't access the things that they need. So making sure that we have the right systems in place, we can really help mitigate those risks. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll understand UPSs a lot better, generators, backup power systems, their strengths or weaknesses, where to use them, where not to use them, to make sure that you can make the best decisions for your business. So I bet almost everybody in this audience has had a power outage due to one of these reasons, mainly because we are going through one of them right now. If you're in the Louisville area, we've got major storms coming through. So if that does happen, I do have a UPS here. Most things will stay online. I might have to grab my laptop. We'll see how that goes. But hopefully it will hold off until the end of this presentation. So as storms comes through, they cause massive outages. They can cause massive outages. They take down trees, power lines. They cause flooding. All kinds of wind gusts that can take out different pieces of equipment everywhere. And this is, power lines, transformers, utility poles, internet cables, all kinds of things can happen. Motor vehicles, they hit all the same things, power lines and transformers, and it can be right outside your door. I've had somebody back into one of the cable junction boxes right outside a business's door to down the line quite a bit. So you don't even have to see it happen. It can just go out. Trees don't need storms to cause problems. They just get old, they die, they fall over. And that's super annoying. It can be a beautiful day outside, your power goes out because this old tree just decided to fall over, and that's it. Lightning strikes, we're a lot better at lightning strikes these days, but they still cause quite a few problems. I just had an incident about a year ago where lightning hit a long way from the MDF, but it hit an IDF that was not grounded properly. Power went through the copper uplinks back to the core switches and took out a whole section of them. And it was really annoying because we couldn't tell that it was a true lightning strike because it was just a few ports are out. It took a long time to troubleshoot and figure out, oh, it died. It came in all the way down the other end. So we had to go figure out all the equipment that died all the way across, which cables we needed to rerun. It was copper uplinks, not fiber. So, the electricity was able to run through it. But yeah, super annoying, just dealing with that kind of stuff. Construction comes through all the time. Those guys are notorious for hitting cables, taking out power. Even if it was authorized, they shut off power when you didn't know about it. Or just the 15-minute outage ends up being a 3-day outage. I can't tell you how many times that happens. So just being able to prepare for that. So some of the questions is, how long can your systems run without utility power? Is it a few hours? Is it a whole day? And then what systems are affected? Obviously your server racks we're all concerned with, but there's a lot of other pieces that affect those. Your lighting, your ISP equipment, your HVAC, your office space. These are all different things that you need to consider. If you have a server rack running, but you have no ISP equipment, that's great, but it's great your server racks up, but if you don't have internet, it's not worth it, right? So you gotta think about all these things. Your HVAC, right? We've seen this many times when the rack's up and running, everything's good, but that room is getting really hot really fast. So how are you gonna handle your HVAC? Or maybe your room's not that big, you just got a smaller IDF or MDF because everything's in the cloud. So it can run for quite a bit. You just need some decent ventilation in there. So before we get into all the fancy UPS and generator stuff, we need to go over a little bit of terminology. And we'll start with voltage. And voltage is what you can think about as lanes on a highway. So the larger the voltage, the more lanes there are on a highway, right? In normal uses for what we're going to be talking about today, we're referring to 120 volts and 208 volts. 120 being the common with American homes, 208 a lot more common in data centers and high power equipment. You still will have 120 volts in your data center. There's generally one thing in everybody's rack that still needs 120 volts, or those little NEMA 515 outlets. So we just need to pay attention to what voltages we're using where. Now, amperage is how much electricity is available to be passed down the wire. So this is the ability for the cars to drive down that road. So a Ferrari can go 20 down a highway. It can also go 140 down that highway. If it's a highway, it's probably going to be going a lot faster. And this is the same reason you can plug a half amp phone charger into a 15 amp outlet and it doesn't blow that phone charger. It's only pulling what it needs, even though there's 30 times as much power available. And then when you plug in, a hair dryer that needs to pull 13 amps, it can pull it perfectly fine. So now we've talked about volts, we've talked about amps. For what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about volt amp quite a bit. And volt amp is apparent power. The math for this is pretty easy. You take your volts times your amps, volt amps. And the examples for these are, 120 volts times 3 amps is 360. But if you switch up to 240 volts, like we do in the data center, then that 360 volt amps gets there by doing 1.5 amps. Generally in the data center, we're going to be pulling 120 volts. It's a lot more efficient. So that's why we like to use that higher voltage. So the same amperage at a higher voltage is more capacity. So using that same math, we get wattage. So while volt amp is what we use to size the circuits, the wiring, and the UPSs, we're going to be doing wattage, and wattage is what those systems actually pull. So it seems like a little difference, but it's going to make a big difference once we're sizing it, because we don't want our volt amps to match our wattage. That means we've severely undersized our system. So we need to make sure that the volt amps is higher than the wattage that we are planning on pulling. Okay, so terminology's done. We got volts, amps, all that good stuff out of the way. We have one more piece that we kind of need to talk about, and that is connectivity. So unfortunately, it's not super simple. We have 3 different standards organizations and governing bodies to talk about with this. For normal home appliances, you'll know these 2 plugs right here, right? The NEMA 515R and 520R. So let's go over what that NEMA means. So that's the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, and they're responsible for these day-to-day receptacles and plugs that we use. And they specify what they are capable of, such as 120 volts, how many amps, etc. Now, the IEC is responsible for the connectors that go on the back of the equipment. So let's say the back of that computer, you know, that little house plug, I've got pictures of it in a minute, I'll show you. That's where the IEC comes in. What is plugged in to that electronic equipment? And then we have one more, and that's the underwriter's laboratory. And they are responsible with safety. And they talk about what those receptacles and plugs are actually allowed to transfer. So when you're looking at these, they will have, you know, your different ratings on them, and you'll be able to see what they're allowed to pull. So for this example, you can see we have a NEMA 515R, and this one here on the right is a 520R. So the 5 here stands for the maximum amount of voltage, 5 being 125 volts. If it was a NEMA 6, other numbers over here, it would be the 250 volt. And if it puts an L in front of it, it'll be the locking version of it. We'll get into that more later. But essentially, knowing how to read this is very important. You can't just plug 15 amp, 20 amp rated stuff into a 15 volt outlet. So looking at these a little bit more, what are these prongs for, right? There's 3 prongs, not too complicated. The short one on the right is the hot. The one on the left is the return, neutral, and the bottom one is ground, or the emergency return. So all these work in conjunction to make sure we have power going in, out, and ground. Now, one big piece of this is just because it's got a 20 amp outlet here, we have to make sure the wiring in the wall is good. You can't just take a 15 amp outlet and stick a 20 amp on it and call it good. There's different ratings for all the wiring behind it to make sure it's good. So speak with your local electrician first. Now, let's get into, just like the last example, these are the locking receptacles. So these are like the NEMA L6s, could be the L5s if they're 120 volt. We've had plenty of clients that just look at these and they're like, oh yeah, I got that round wall, that round plug on the wall, should be good. No worries. These look fine in the pictures. They order it from wherever they're ordering from just because the picture looked right. They get there and they find out there's a difference. It's 120 volt instead of 250. It's 15 amp instead of 20. And these are all just a little bit different and they don't all plug into each other. So we need to be very careful at what we're doing. Luckily, the ratings are all stamped on the outlet. So if you look really closely at the wall or at the receptacle, you can see what that voltage and rating is. So just like this, if you zoom in, you can see that it's 125 volt and 30 amps on that one. And you can't see it on the black one, but it is imprinted on there. So we just need to make sure we're paying attention. Now this one is the fancy NEMA. What we call the fancy NEMA, right? It's got a 4th connector on it. And what the 4th connector is it's a 3rd phase of power, or another phase of power. And the advantage of using more phases is efficiency and balance. So if you have 3 pipes instead of 2, you can distribute the flow of water or electricity a lot more evenly. So with 3 phases, you can achieve a more balanced power distribution. It also allows for one of those phases to potentially go out and keep some services back up. Generally not in these applications, but it really helps. So you'll see extra phases of power when we're talking about large equipment and UPSs pulling a lot of draw, trying to get that most efficient draw that we can. So let's look at these IEC connectors here. So these are the C13s, C14s. This is what you're used to seeing in the back of all your normal computers. Now, there is this new one, the C15 and C16. They are both rated for 15 amps, right? The difference is the C13 and 14 are rated for 158 degrees, and those C15 and 16s are rated for 248 degrees, both Fahrenheit. The reason we call these spiteful is because there's no amperage benefits. It's only heat, and if we're getting up to 248 degrees, we got a lot of other problems in our data centers. So you know, it's not providing us a huge benefit. That being said, do not take a C13 cable and notch it out and plug it into a C16. I've seen people do that. That's not going to go well long term. So let's not do that. Just make sure we get the right cable. All else fails, if you get the C15 cables, they will generally plug into the C14s and you'll be okay, depending on the tolerances. Then you get into the higher wattage equipment. We got C19 and C20 connectors now. These are rated for 20 amps as opposed to the 15. So a lot of times with UPSs and PDUs, you'll see these C19, C20 connectors. So it helps. And just a note, these are all North American ratings. If you leave the country, you need to look it up. North America is the least conservative country as far as all these ratings go. So while the C19 and C20 is rated for 20 amps here, it might be 15 in the EU or the South Americas, different places. So we just have to be cognizant of that if we're doing international work. All right, so PDUs. Why do we need PDUs? PDUs add more receptacles to your UPSs. Now, generally the small UPSs, they have their own like NEMA 515 connectors on it. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But when we get into the large non-desktop PDUs, a lot of those only have the large amperage locking connectors on them, right? They don't have, but they might have one or two of the consumer rated plugs in them, but generally PDUs are going to be what distributes your power to all your servers. These can be dumb, just like the normal Walmart power strips that you get, or they can be smart. A lot of the new APC PDUs, the new trip lights, they have network connectivity into them so that you can connect to them. This provides a lot of benefits because you can remote into them. You can turn off ports, turn on ports remotely in case you can't get to your ILO or your iDRAC or your BMC. They also have monitoring on them so you can see how much power draw, and that greatly helps us when we're sizing our UPSs later, right? These do come in horizontal and vertical forms. We'll take a look at that in a second. And the big thing to note here is that PDUs are built for server racks, right? They're built for that high power draw. Do not use the cheap the cheap ones that you can get at Best Buy, at Walmart. They're not rated for this. In almost every data center we go in, the SMB market, there's a couple of these on the floor. Random things are plugged into them. These are not built the same. They have different internals. They have smaller cables. They go bad. They can catch fire. They short out. But please do not use these. So these vertical PDUs, while I said they are built more for server racks, they still have ratings on them, right? They can be overloaded. There'll be a bank of 6 on the bottom, 6 on the top, however it's built. You can't just plug everything into one bank and call it good. We need to distribute that load evenly. We need to monitor and make sure we're not overloading it. Even on the non-network connectivity PDUs, there's still usually an amperage load on the side of these guys, so you can see what the draw is. So monitoring these are key. The other recommendation I give out a lot is make sure you get short cables. It might seem silly because you have all these cables. We all have all these cables sitting around, but these short cables tremendously help out with airflow in these racks. So that helps keep your heat down. That helps keep your power consumption down because it's not trying to cool it down by spinning those fans up. And keeps everything nice and clean. You don't accidentally pull the wrong cable and it's wrapped around another cable and you pull the power out of the wrong server. That happens all the time. So these short cables are super awesome. In that same note of keeping everything clean, these two PDUs are right next to each other. And that is all about how your power systems are built into your servers. If all the power supplies are on one side and that's your full rack, this works great. A lot of times we will separate these and put them on opposite sides of each other. And that really helps out if you're retrofitting. So you got to swap an old PD out with a new one. It really helps having them separated out so that you're not bumping against them. Also, just getting in that rack to be able to swap PDUs out is a pain and it stinks to do later. So if you're getting a PDU, I'd say spend the extra money, get the right one. That way you don't have to swap it out later. It helps so much. And the last piece is, if we have 2 PDUs in here, but we only have one UPS, we still have that single point of failure of a single UPS. So that's just something to think about. Still happens a lot, buying 2 UPSs to right size your systems can be hard. So that's just something we need to think about. Now, horizontal PDUs. These are great for those small IDFs that you have or small closets that you have, right? They fit in there. You don't need the hugely tall ones. You only need, some of these little NEMA 515 connectors, no big deal. You don't need all the big IEC connectors. So it works great for that. This is where cable management, like I said in the last one, really comes into play. Every time I see these, they have super long cables in them, terrible cable management, terrible airflow. These guys are always running real hard. You go and clean those cables up and remap them all around, helps out tremendously. And these guys do also have the network connectivity into them so that you can monitor these as well. So just a heads up on that. These guys are fantastic when used appropriately. So let's get into UPS types. It's kind of what we're all here for. So this first style that we're talking about, this is the standby UPS. It's a general use desktop UPS that you can get generally from Best Buy. You can get them from anywhere, right? They're generally smaller in size. They're 700 VA, they're 1500 VA. And these have three core components. They have the surge and noise filter, and that helps maintain the load as it comes in. It makes sure the voltage is within the minimum maximum levels. It has a battery, obviously, to be able to provide the power, and it's got an inverter charger. And this is what charges the battery when it's low, and whenever the power goes out and the surge and noise filter sees it, the inverter kicks over, converts that DC back to AC, and gives you power to your upstream appliances, right? So while these look good, this type of system, because the load isn't always applied, is the slowest style. This can take up to 1 second to flip over. So if you've ever been in your home with one of these UPSs, or the office with one of these desktop style UPSs, and the power flips, you hear that click. A lot of times your monitors will kick off and then kick back on. If you have a desktop plugged into them, maybe it powered off, maybe it didn't. Just depend on how fast it detected that load and how fast it flipped over. So that's why we really recommend these style UPSs for desktops, monitors, systems, not for your racks of equipment over here, right? However, that is what I'm running on mine because I'm a little cheaper. So that being said, for small IDFs, they can still work in a pinch. The next style UPS we're going to be talking about is the line interactive. And this still goes, it has most of the same components, but has one difference. So it still goes through the surge and noise filter to make sure everything's within the right levels. And then it goes through a voltage regulator. And this helps reduce its reliance on the battery. It helps regulate that voltage a little bit better. So if you get brownouts that come in, maybe it helps hold that voltage just a little tighter. It does have quite a bit faster response, right? So where the standby style can take up to a second, this will go within 2 to 4 milliseconds, which is fast enough for most systems not to go offline. This is generally what you see in the medium-sized market because it goes in server racks. Great, they're all rack mountable. They run 600 VA to about 5,000 VA. They're fast, they're responsive. Some equipment still doesn't like that 2 to 4 millisecond response, depending on what your switches are. They have internal systems, they have internal capacitors, generally not batteries or anything, but most of the time these work great. However, if you are really concerned that power never goes out, we have a full online system. And these systems do what's called a double conversion all the time. So it converts the power from AC to DC and then from DC back to AC. So the awesome part about this is the power never goes out. The bad part about this is the least efficient and the most expensive, right? So you're paying for it up front because it's got the most components. Power is always going in and out, and then you're paying for it again on power consumption because you're double converting all the time, right? So these do grow massively. They can go up to full racks. You can order them from APC and they come in giant racks. You wheel them in, super cool. But this is great because the power never goes out. It's always converting it from DC power, as long as you have battery, of course. So that's cool. Now, the main function of a UPS is to store energy, right? So throughout all the years, for a long time, we've been using lead acid batteries. just like your normal car batteries, tried and true, love them. Lithium is the new guy on the block, right? It's being used everywhere from, new EV cars, RC batteries, and all that stuff. Uh, Everything's converting to lithium. They're lightweight, higher density, and a smaller footprint. Everybody is making the batteries for them. They're getting much more efficient than they are, much safer than they are. So those are some of the new guys on the market. We'll talk about them a little bit more as we go on. Now there are some other types of UPSs, right? I mean, all we're doing is storing energy saved for later. So some of the UPSs that are still out there, like rotary styles, right? So these are giant discs that run in these drums. They can take like 24, 48 hours to spin all the way up, but they are generally for high consumption use, right? Like you need to be pulling kilovolts, like thousands of volts for this to make sense. Doesn't make sense for most of our applications. Yeah, but they are out there for large equipment and large voltage pulling and amperage pulling. Okay, so UPSs, generators. Generators act as a second form of mains power, not like UPSs, right? So generators, they sit outside your building, they run off natural gas, propane, diesel, and depending on your business needs, this generator can either supply power just to your UPS, right? Just your critical loads, or they can provide power to your air conditioning, your lighting, all your office circuits. It's all about your business needs and wants and what you need that generator to supply. Just like for your house, right? Do you need just your fridge to run, or do you need your HVAC to run because it's Texas and the middle of summer is 100 degrees and you want to keep cool, right? So we just need to think about everything that we want that generator to run, and that's how we're going to size it appropriately. So we talked about a lot of this. Generators are going to be long-term power outages. UPSs, short-term power outages. The big difference is UPSs are fast to flip over power, right? Even the desktops, they're 1 second. The generators, they can take, minutes to kick in. They're a lot of work, right? Even if they're automatic, they're going to be 30 seconds to kick in for a good automated system. Your stuff can't sit offline for 30 seconds. You know how long that boot up is? Do you know what kind of corruption you're going to run into if all your systems just shut down? I've had plenty of clients say, yeah, we got a generator, we're just going to kick it on. I was like, yeah, but everything's shut off really hard. So good luck getting all booted back up, not corrupt. Knowing that everything's in place. Whenever you're turning systems back on, there's always a lot of manual tasks that need to be done. So that's where we really want to put UPSs in front of those generators to make sure we don't have that outage for those few minutes. Generators are great though. They provide that mains power where your UPS can't hold it, right? But they do need to be maintained. We got to cycle that fuel. If they're running on diesel, we need to, one, make sure that we get it maintained regularly, monthly, quarterly, run it. We have to cycle the fuel. If it sits for too long, it goes bad, right? So we need to make sure we're taking care of it. If it is on a consumption-based fuel, propane, diesel, we need to make sure we have a contract with somebody, right? Flexential down in most of their locations, I know the one in Louisville, they use diesel generators and they have a contract with a local, I think it's Thornton's or BP, and they will ship tankers in to refill their generators if needed for long-term power outages. So making sure you have that contract, making sure you know where you're going to get the fuel. You can't just go fill up a tank at a local gas station and think you're going to be okay. Maybe if you're small enough, but that's probably not the best. The power coming out of these generators, very dirty power, right? Just like you're getting from the power grid. It's going to fluctuate up and down. It's going to have over voltages, under voltages. So this is where we still need UPSs in line to clean up that power. Okay, so what systems need to be protected by alternative power, right? Just like we talked about earlier, we've got our production servers. How about our core networking equipment, right? So servers are up, but are all your IDFs up? Is your Wi-Fi up? Do your people at your desk have laptops? So they're 3 monitors turn off, they get out their laptop, they're going to keep working. Is that good? What about your carrier equipment? This happens all the time where you set it all up right. Oh, AT&T, their UPS died, or they didn't never put one in. They never actually wired it properly. So, while everything seems to be up, your internet is down, so it was worthless, right? So making sure everything in the line is connected, power redundant, is critical. Now, another best practice, these UPSs don't last forever, right? The old lead acid batteries generally last 3 to 6 years, depending on usage, heat, all these factors that go into them. So we need to make sure that we're maintaining them properly. Now, the new lithium batteries, APCs come out, Schneider's come out, and they're like, yeah, these guys are going to last 10 years. They've got a lot better longevity to them. So what we try and do is place those in an area for the business where they're going to be most beneficial, right? Because they're more expensive for sure. But if you don't have to replace them but once every 10 years, as opposed to these lead acids that are 3 to 6 years, it could really pay off. We're going to talk about that more in a minute too. But the internal UPS systems, while your batteries might last 3 to 6 years, we don't want to just keep replacing the batteries over and over and over. Those internal components, they die. So generally we'll say, replace the batteries 2, maybe 3 times, but then you should generally replace the whole UPS itself, because the technology for switching over, it goes bad. Those brownouts really work on those surge and noise filters. It causes all kinds of problems. They start humming. You can hear it when they're starting to go bad. It's not good for them. So that's where we generally say around 10 years is where you need to replace that. And that works out really well with the lithium. Swap the whole unit out, right? So your generator, just like we talked about earlier, that diesel will gel. It needs swapped out. You need to run it. You need to maintain it. And just like a car, it needs to get fired up. It needs to run for a little bit. Put a load on it. Make sure it's good. Also on the UPSs, one other thing is the UPS doesn't know when its batteries are bad. You actually have to apply a load. So it'll see good voltage on that the whole time. But if you're not putting a load on it, UPS might say it's fine. And then when it actually gets to apply a load, it just shuts off completely. So that's something we definitely want to test on a regular basis. So let's talk about when it goes bad. What do we do, right? So you have an event. Let's say you don't have a generator, your UPS kicks in. What do you do now? How do you shut down your systems? Let's say you think your UPS is going to be good for 45 minutes, right, at your current load. Well, now you have to shut down all your hosts, right? So you shut down all your hosts. Now you got to shut down your SAN. How long does that take? How long does it take for you to shut down your VMs, your hosts, your storage, so that you can actually shut it all off before the UPS dies, right? So that can take 45 minutes easily. Who can make the call? So let's say you're all right. I know it takes me 30. Let's say I can do it in 30 minutes. I'm comfortable. Well, who can make the call? Or how do you decide when to shut all the systems down? You don't know how long that power is going to last. So you need to have a defined process in place to make sure you are prepared for when that power goes out. While manual processes are good, automation scripts help out tremendously, right? If you got a script that can start shutting down everything for you instead of going through and manually shutting down everything, it will speed everything up tremendously. One thing people forget a lot is a transfer switch. So UPS is cool, you got your whole rack powered. What if you need to do work on it? What if you're going to flip it over to mains power or to a secondary UPS? Transfer switches are often overlooked, but they are hugely beneficial to be able to make sure you can do maintenance on that UPS, to make sure you can replace those batteries, to make sure you can upgrade it. So those transfer switches are awesome. Don't forget that. So sizing these a little bit. A couple different things we need to go over for sizing. How long do you intend to run without utility power or generator power? Generally, we say, I've had people come up and they're like, well, we don't want to deal with the generator. We're just going to buy a big UPS that can handle the load and run for like 6 hours. We've decided 6 hours is good. Well, and that sounds great on paper. We see problems all the time with people trying to run for sustained periods on those UPSs. When those UPSs kick in, all the components heat up a whole lot. The batteries get a lot of draw on them. After an hour or two, they start acting really weird. They can just shut down because they're not used to that sustained load for that amount of time. The batteries drop dramatically. You really have to oversize it instead of using your normal sizing, right? So that's why we tell people generator plus a UPS to be able to sustain those long-term power outages. And then, what's your growth going to be? Or are you going to be smaller in the future? And planning for that, right? Do you want to buy one UPS now and another later if you grow? Or do you want to buy a large UPS now and be prepared for it in the future and have extra runtime? Are you going to have two UPSs that sit next to each other that can both sustain the load in case one goes bad, or 50% of the load, right? So we really want to think about how many UPSs we need, how we're going to put them into place, what equipment they're going to be on. And also, don't forget, with a lot of these new UPSs, they can daisy chain off of each other, so you can hook up more modules to the bottom of them, more batteries to the bottom of them. So that is definitely something to think about. I get clients all the time that are like, yeah, I think this will be good, and then a year later, they're like, yeah, I'm just going to buy another shelf, put that on. We're going to double our load, our runtime, whatever it may be, and then they're good to go. One thing we've seen people do is running their air conditioner off their UPS. Once you get into some of these UPSs that are a little bit bigger, or you have like an in-row APC, sometimes they'll wire it directly into their UPS. This kills the load of the UPS. Generally, this is happened because the wiring gets mixed up and the electricians, just wired in thinking, it's going to be fine because they don't really know what type of load. Or you get those little portable units and you just plug it into the PDU, like thinking that's really going to help out, and then that just kills everything really fast. So definitely don't do that. So sizing, right? We need to know how long we need to run. Well, to figure out how long we need to run, we need to pull out how much wattage we're pulling, right? Like I said earlier, wattage is what we need to get to be able to prepare for volt amps. So where do we get that? We get that from a lot of different sources. We pull it from any UPS or PDU that you already have, right? So if you can log into your PDUs and be like, oh, I'm pulling 1200 watts, that makes this easy. If you can get it from your UPS, because it'll tell you, that's awesome as well. A lot of time iDRAC and ILO, as long as it's the newer version, it'll tell you what that power draw is. And that is a lot different from the spec sheet. Let's say you got a 740XD and it's rated for 1200 watts. That's a lot on a spec sheet, but you log into the iDRAC and you're like, oh, I'm pulling 300 watts. That's a huge difference. So if you go by the spec sheet, those are all built off the maximum draw. So we definitely don't want to use that, but we do need to keep it in mind for when we build out these UPSs and PDUs, because if you're in a startup situation and you start everything at once, it will be close to that maximum draw while all the fans are spinning up, while it's turning everything on. We just need to be cognizant of that so that we can fire things up properly, not overload our systems when we're just trying to start back up. And a lot of times it's a wild ass guess, right? We know about what's going to be in there. We know about the load that's going to be on it, but you stand up a new ERP system or convert a bunch of stuff over from physical to virtual. You pull stuff in from the cloud, you push stuff off from the cloud. A lot of things can change, and that really affects power draw. So we just need to know what we're getting into. Now, talking about all the different devices we have, let's say you got multiple power supplies. One of those dies, that's a whole different draw for the single power supply. That changes from a little bit of power on each PDU to all the power on one PDU, right? So we need to be thinking about that with our PDU sizing. We don't want to just split the load everywhere and think we're good, because then if half of it goes off, you're going to blow the other side, and then it's all bad real fast. Definitely don't do just all your servers and forget your switches. Have that happen all the time. Switches do pull a decent amount of power, especially now when you can run all your Wi-Fi off your switches too. They do have a decent amount of draw that can throw you over budget real fast. So you get all that info, how much amperage is needed, right? You're getting a lot closer now. So you're like, okay, I got 6 servers, I got 4 switches. This is all the equipment that goes in there. I got a KVM, a few other little things. That's cool. I've got X amount of amps think I'm good. Well, now how many circuits do you need, right? So like we talked about those PDUs earlier, they are really going to help you out with how many circuits you need. We run into problems all the time where you run out of circuits and receptacles to plug everything into. So we need to think about all that, figure out where we're going to plug it into. Are we going to be good? And once we have all of our info, how long do we need to run, right? We can size out that volt amp pretty easily from that. Maintenance, definitely make sure that we maintain everything. There's nothing worse than saying, hey, I got this UPS here, your thunderstorm comes in, it all turns off because you haven't checked it, right? So making sure that we run it all through on a regular basis. Making sure you check your loads on your UPSs. You know, you plugged it in a year ago and everything was fine. You were at 60% load. Well, Bob and Frank have been in here and they plugged in some other stuff and now you're like 80, 90% load. So your runtime is way down from what it used to be. So we definitely need to pay attention to that future load and capacity. And just like I said earlier, UPSs do not know when batteries are bad. We need to put that load on them, stress test them, see how they handle it. And test your redundancy. Just because you have two PDUs doesn't mean they can both handle that load. So definitely test that out and make sure you're good. One thing that testing really helps out with, it helps your confidence level, right? So your boss comes to you and he says, hey, they're gonna be doing some construction out this weekend. Our generator's good, our UPS is good for when they cut that power to the building. You definitely don't want to say, I think so. That doesn't help them feel better with all of this. Testing also helps identify issues, right? So yeah, UPSs are starting to go bad. We don't think we're not getting the runtime that we thought we were going to get out of them. Helps validate that everything is working properly. Are you getting alerts, right? Like let's say you're home at 3 in the morning and your power goes out and you have to manually fire up that generator within an hour. Make sure your alerts are working. Make sure everybody knows what to do. Helps find issues with batteries. Get those swapped out earlier. You don't want to find out last minute. Making sure your alerts and process documentation, right? If you're out of town, we all like vacation. I mean, most of us do, right? If I'm gone, I hope the guy next to me knows how to shut all this stuff down. It happens all the time where, oh, the VMware guy's gone, but we got the storage guy. He can shut everything down, right? Like he doesn't know the process for everything. So making sure that it's all documented helps out tremendously. So that brings us up to the end. Power outages are one of the top reasons for IT outages. I did a lot of research on this. Everybody has different metrics, but they all agree that power outages happen, and they're one of the main reasons for taking systems down. We're going to be sending this out. There's a lot of interesting links. We go into much more detail in a lot of these documents on, all the different standards, all the different naming bodies, sizing, how to set up alerts, different types of UPSs. We tried to fit all this in a good little webinar, and I hope we're good for you. So with that, Taylor, Leah, do we have anything else?
I believe that's it. I did update the settings, so if anybody does have any questions right now, you should be able to unmute. You should. So let me know if you can't, but I just updated those.
We did have one question that came in earlier, and that is about, lithium batteries are here. They're cool, right? Can you plug a lithium battery into your pre-existing UPSs? And while we haven't got an official answer from APC or Schneider, we're going to go with no. While ventilation and heat and everything are about the same, the charging mechanics, electrical circuits aren't built for lithium, and you definitely don't want to overvolt. You don't want to burn down your house. You don't want to burn down anything else. So we are recommending you stay with a full lithium system if you're going to do that. Don't try and retrofit it in.
I have a question. This is Dustin Koenig.
Yeah.
With ransomware and everything around, I know our UPS is set up on the network so we can get alerts when it comes on and stuff. Is that a significant source, and should I be concerned? Is that an in for bad people?
Sure.
So the network?
Yeah, and that's definitely a concern, right? Like there's been all these hacks out lately with refrigerator got hacked and it was on the same network as everything else. And now that's how they got in. What we generally recommend with like these IoT type devices is putting them on a separate VLAN and kind of DMZing them off, just so that they don't have access to your full network, right? Get 1 or 2 PCs that can get out, especially with APC and what is it, the eco structure the APCs can phone home to, and then it can do all your reporting for you. So you can set up your firewalls to only have certain ports go in and out so that they're a lot more locked down. But yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely a concern.
Okay, thank you.
Because those definitely don't get the firmware updates like all of our normal systems do. They're generally running some old Linux version. So
Exactly.
yep. I throw those on the same VLAN with like your HVAC controls, things like that. So
Okay, great. Thanks, Dustin.
yep. No problem, Dustin.
Any other questions? All right. That was fun and easy.
Yeah, not bad. Are we going to be posting this out on our website, Leah? I think.
Yes. So I will get the recording together. I'll get the slides from Dustin, and I'll also include a couple of our other resources that we have. We have a white paper, and we also have some blogs, and those will be included in the follow-up emails that you guys will get either today or tomorrow.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you all for coming. If you have questions, you can always reach out to one of us and we'd be happy to help you. And yeah, we'll send this out afterwards so you have the links to study.